We're now joined via Zoom by political analyst Ongama Mtimka. Very good afternoon to you. So thank you, as always, for agreeing to join us here on the show.
Good afternoon, Flo. Thank you for having me here.
Well, you know, it's this interesting this time around. It seems that independent candidates are sort of gaining traction and, you know, dominating when it comes to the conversations that we're having. But one wonders if this will translate to what actually happens after the elections. I mean, given the fact that they don't necessarily have the kind of funding that the big parties have, the kind of following that the big parties have, and certainly even as we sit now, we don't necessarily know who all those independents are at this time.
Sure. I think to me it signals the reality of a trend towards the decline of the dominant party system in South Africa, as well as loss of confidence that we are seeing in political parties. If you look at what the last reported number was, a jump of over 200 candidates, if my memory serves me well. So it bodes well for South African democracy, especially given the fact that we have seen instances, Flo, where a candidate that is popular in a community gets sidelined by a political party, and they go on to stand for election in that ward and win the seat from the candidate. And there are two ways in which this has happened. And both the DA and the ANC have suffered this. The popular candidate either takes the ward to another political party, as it has happened to both the ANC and the DA, Nelson Mandela Bay, or they take it to become independent. So it's been an interesting phenomenon that has happened before. How much the communities are willing to follow through with these nominations remains to be seen, especially given the fact that the ANC, for example, has become a lot more sensitive to gatekeeping this time and wants to take the challenge head on to those candidates, because previously what amounted to potential success for independent candidates was frustration by party political processes, despite being popular. When the party actually now says we will go for popular candidates despite our internal politics, obviously that takes the challenge to these independent candidates. So it won't be easy for them, but they are coming in a broader political environment where there's loss of confidence in political parties.
You know, you say something very interesting. You talk about the possible decline of party dominance, which is technically really all we know here in democratic South Africa in any case. Does that not then open the door for possible dictatorships, you know, which we're seeing, you know, particularly on this continent, if we were talking about independent candidates, a situation where an independent candidate becomes so powerful that it may then lead to, you know, fears, you know, that, and rightly so, that it might open the door then to what could be a dictatorship?
So here's what's interesting. And this is a phenomenon that I observed during the time that the ANC took over in Nelson Mandela Bay. This concept of leveraged power that cannot be held accountable by either of the political parties. It becomes an emergent phenomenon in council itself and is unaccountable to anyone. So how it happened in the ANC was that the party itself didn't want to take a dominant position in the coalition Nelson Mandela Bay, and it resulted in the smaller parties taking the mayoral position. And in fact, it did result in what you are saying, Flo, even though, so it was definitely unaccountable power, but was not a dictatorship per se. It was the leveraging of the vulnerable position that the party found itself in Nelson Mandela Bay. So the party could not intervene. By the way, in some municipalities, we are concerned about the party intervening too much. But there was a time where the desire was for the party to actually intervene in Nelson Mandela Bay to just clamp down on that unaccountable power.
Yeah.
But it couldn't happen because they didn't have the mayoral position. So you're quite right, it's a phenomenon, but it's not a case where you can locate that power in one factor, say, for example, independent candidates. It actually becomes an emergent phenomenon of coalition government and the leveraging that those who represent coalitions within government actually end up doing or misbehaving, as opposed to the actual nature of independent candidates themselves.
Yeah, Mr. Mtimka, maybe I'm getting, a little bit more and more skeptical the older I grow. But the first thing I'm going to say, if I see an independent candidate who's gaining traction, who's getting some sort of support, the first thing I'll say is, who is behind this candidate? I mean, with we've been able to see resources being or funding being pushed towards certain parties, and certain people having certain interests will then obviously contribute funds to that political party that speaks to them if they have the monies to do so. But I will always wonder, if a person is an independent candidate and is really gaining traction, my question is going to be, what's behind that? Who is behind that? What is behind that? And I wonder if that's something that we as South Africans should really be looking at too, in terms of not just looking at the candidate, at the independent candidate as an independent candidate, but also questioning where this person might be getting funding or resources or whatever it is.
That's interesting. So in the US, that independent candidate, I suppose they stand for constituencies as independents, and there's a phenomenon of vote buying linked to candidate support. However, in South Africa, we've even at the level of political parties, we started asking questions around correlations between political party funding and the extent to which individuals or businesses get business from the state. But it has not been so prevalent that it becomes a factor, for example, where we say the ANC has voted in a certain way because they have been funded in parliament. The integratedness between our politics and political economic life has not been so dependent on voting by MPs that it has given rise to that factor. Yes, indeed, we may be concerned about general state capture at the level of transactions by a municipality, but it has not gone to the extent that, in fact, Bosasa was quite odd for me, where you find that their largesse went as far as spending money on politicians in parliament. But it's not something that has become prominent as far as I understand things in South Africa. They were quite odd as far as my understanding of the state business relationships or state parliamentary relationships, business and parliamentary relationships. In general, legislators, whether they are at local councillors or MPLs or at a national level, have not become so important to business that there would be a strategic pursuit of them. But what quite interesting in Nelson Mandela Bay, that small business forums that had interest in spin-offs that come from wards had very direct interest in those candidates' flow, to the extent that arguments were made that when the UDM caused an upset in a by-election in 130 in Nelson Mandela Bay, it was mainly because of support from small business interests that wanted to capture what decision-making processes. How prevalent it is throughout the country, to the extent that we would be concerned about that as a driver of the increase in ward candidates, remains to be seen. I doubt that it has gotten to those levels, but you're quite right, there are manifestations of it, even though they may be small time and based in specific wards throughout the country. Right. What I find is that the greater development happens in specific wards, the greater the interest of not necessarily big business, but organized political entrepreneurs in specific wards, to the extent that they would even kill, actually, if their candidate at the level of the party is not winning. Whether they are now betting on independent candidates, it would be quite interesting to see.
All right, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. We appreciate your time, Mr. Ongama Mtimka, who is a political analyst. We'll certainly be having more and more conversations with you as we head to the elections this year. Thanks so much.